Today, some life lessons from a bereavement. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Well, it's the 23rd of June today, which means that it's 6 months, the 23rd of December last year, since my wife Jill died. And it's been a long, slow grind as I've worked through many issues following her death. But I wanted to share today a few thoughts because I've learnt many lessons through this process. And maybe there are observations that I can make that will perhaps help others prepare better for an unexpected bereavement. But before I start, just a quick update. Of course, Jill died in December from mesothelioma, an asbestos-related disease. And we'd created a charity called Asbestos Awareness Australia. That charity is running quite well now, and we've built a website, and we've built a YouTube channel, and we're continuing to a campaign for reform of asbestos. Now the new government's in, we're going to up the game there. Jill struggled for a number of years with asbestos-related disease, and ultimately she succumbed probably 30 years from being originally exposed to asbestos. And that's the problem with asbestos, it's a long-term problem. And by the way, governments and health officials really don't want to know about it, which is a problem because around 1/3 of properties in Australia contain asbestos, and you only need one exposure to create a problem later. But let me talk specifically about her death and the process beyond her death. So the first thing I found was when I went to speak to the local cremation people, well, there were lots of forms to fill in, remarkable number actually. It took quite a long time. And the cost of just a basic funeral, we went for a cremation, was around $6,000 or $7,000 without any bells and whistles or anything else. Now, for some people, that cost would be quite significant. So it is worth thinking about just the pure cost side. And if we'd actually had a funeral service at the crematorium, it would have been a lot more. The second point to make is that the process for me personally of coming to terms with Jill's death was pretty traumatic. Of course, we shared a house and we shared a life, and suddenly she's no longer there. And for the first 3 or 4 months, I really was off keel. And by the way, the dogs were too. They kept going on trying to see whether she was back in her room. But slowly over time, you begin to acclimatise and begin to adjust. But it's not a linear process. Some days I feel good, some days less good. But actually, continuing to make shows on my Walk the World channel has been a very important process for me. And one of the observations is it's important to, I think, have other things to think about. But some of the legal issues are really interesting. Jill was a lawyer and also a professor of law. But she refused steadfastly to make a will, saying she didn't want to pay the $150 required or thereabouts to make a will, even if you do it yourself. So as a result of that, I had to try and deal with her estate. And there is a mechanism called getting letters of administration, which is a way of dealing with an estate where there is no will. But the process of letters of administration is not straightforward. In New South Wales, you have to go through quite a complicated set of processes. Of course, you have to post news of her death first and then later make an application for letters of administration. There's 4 or 5 forms again. It's quite complicated. They need a lot of information, a lot of detail, and they also have to pay a fee based on the size of the estate. But one complication in Jill's case was that she actually had been divorced in the UK some years before I met her. And the court wouldn't take as evidence my marriage certificate, where it said that she was previously divorced. They needed to see the original decree absolute from her UK divorce. Now, just think about that. Here I am in Australia. I don't know where precisely she got divorced or when she got divorced. So the process of getting that piece of paper from the UK has taken absolutely months. have to go through various processes in the UK. I tried to get a local lawyer to look it up in the UK. They couldn't. So I did it all from here. You pay a fee, they go off and do a big search, and eventually, hopefully, they come back with a piece of paper that is a copy of the decree absolute. So the moral of the story is, make a will. Doesn't cost that much, and it makes things so much easier. See, the problem is that whilst joint accounts can be transferred to the sole owner, any assets in Jill's sole name has to be handled via the letter of administration, which means that those accounts are frozen for now, which means I can't get access to any information or indeed any funds from her account. Now, hopefully it'll get sorted out in the next few weeks, but it will take some time. I think the other point to make is that all of the banks have really complicated processes with regard to the administration of accounts once there's a death. Almost exclusively, they froze accounts, waiting for further information, waiting for sight of the death certificate and other things like that. And in some cases, it's still frozen, pending the letter of administration, which is contingent upon getting the divorce certificate. So it does make a lot of sense to make sure that there are accounts which are accessible without needing to get probate or a will approved. Otherwise, you can end up with funds not available or not accessible when you might need them. Now, there's one other tip I just want to share, and that is relating to self-managed superannuation. Jill and I had a self-managed super fund, and we were both the two sole trustees of the fund. As soon as she died, the fund then became illegal because you need two separate trustees. And after taking some advice and trying to figure out what to do, I had to essentially reconstitute the superannuation fund and create a corporate entity. I'm now the sole director of that corporate entity. That was a long, slow, and legal process, and it meant that all the shares needed to be transferred into the new fund, which took a long time, a lot of paperwork, and it was also worth saying that it was not straightforward. So as part of the grieving process, I initially arranged to hold a celebration event here at my home, and we had a number of people around. I also streamed that. And then a few weeks later, we also scattered her ashes in a local place that she loved to go to, down at the beach. Now, those were important milestones in the process of normalising, but the bottom line for me is 6 months on, it's not normal yet. It may become so in a year or two, maybe, I don't know. But anybody who thinks that grieving is weeks and it all just fades away is completely wrong. My experience is that this is something which will be with me for the rest of my life. I will continue to go forward and be positive and think about the future. The other interesting observation is that I received many messages of support on the community here and face-to-face. And some people seemed quite willing and able to discuss Jill's death with me, but I also noted that there were a number of people who didn't want to touch the subject at all, because death, of course, is a subject that people don't really want to talk about. Now, the reason I'm making this post at 6 months is that I think it's important to think about the process of death. It's part of life as much as any other part. So I guess the bottom line is this. In the middle of trying to deal with the grief and everything else, there are loads and loads of tactical and practical things you have to do with regard to the administration of the estate. And it's worth laying some foundations ahead of time to make things easier. Make a will. Make sure that the superannuation structure you've got is appropriate, and you think about the consequences if one of the trustees, for example, fell ill and died. And also think about access to funds, because it can take months and months for a letter of administration to come through. There are so many traps for the unwary, and it's at a time when you're probably less well equipped to deal with it. Anyway, I think that's enough of my reflections, so I hope you found some of those thoughts useful. And if you've got time, go and check out Asbestos Awareness Australia and see what we've been up to. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.